Over the 12 years of service, Officer Daniel Parker was proud of what he had done. A small town's reputation with the surest officer, with a calm hand when something gets crazy. He had been through all the great moments, intense pursuit at unparalleled speeds, breaking bloody bar fights and bursting drug trafficking. But more often than not, his nights were consumed by quiet vigilance, peering into the undisturbed faces of his community. Tonight was one of those quiet nights. The cool air had chased most indoors, and the streets were all but deserted. Daniel was counting down the final minutes of his shift when something unusual caught his eye. Ahead, an aging sedan, its body mottled with rust patches, erratically wandered between the lanes. Its left taillight pulsed irregularly, winking in and out of existence. The driver's actions weren't exaggerated enough to indicate intoxication, but something about the whole scene tripped Daniel's internal alarms. Years of experience had taught him to trust those instincts. Decision made, he hit the lights on his cruiser, indicating for the vehicle to pull over. The sedan coasted to a stop, its engine wheezing and coughing like a lifelong smoker. Daniel positioned his patrol car behind it, exited his vehicle, and approached with measured steps. Up close, the car's deterioration was even more apparent. A maze of scratches and dents told stories of countless minor mishaps, while rust spots bloomed across its surface like autumn leaves. When he reached the driver's window, Daniel rapped his knuckles against the glass with practiced precision. "License and registration, please," he announced in the measured tone he'd perfected over countless traffic stops. The occupant remained motionless for a moment before the window began its descent with a protesting groan. As the barrier between them disappeared, Daniel found himself looking not at a reckless driver, but at a man who seemed to have lived through several lifetimes. This driver seemed almost ethereal in his fragility, with his gnarled hands quivering against the steering column. His eyes, sunken into a face lined from a lifetime of experience, seemed empty, with an almost palpable loss. Still, what caught Daniel's eye was the neatly folded American flag resting in his lap. The elderly man lifted his gaze to meet Daniel's, and in that look, Daniel saw something that made his professional demeanor falter, a raw, unfiltered pain that transcended age and circumstance. "Officer, am I in trouble?" The question came out as little more than a whisper, with each word seemingly costing the speaker dearly in energy. His shaking fingers traced the edges of the flag with reverent familiarity. "I'm just trying to get to my boy." Daniel felt his throat constrict as understanding began to dawn. "Sir, are you okay? Where are you headed?" The old man's voice was laced with a tired sigh, his eyes straying out into the darkness beyond the windshield, as if peering for someone way out in the distance. "My son. Today's his birthday. He's gone now, died overseas. I was just trying to get to the cemetery. Needed to be with him tonight." The revelation struck Daniel with the force of a physical blow. The hairs on the back of his neck stood at attention as the weight of it settled over him. This wasn't some traffic violation. This was raw grief in human form, a father's love that refused to be diminished by death. With each passing second, the man seemed to age before his eyes, bent under the burden of his loss. "How far is the cemetery?" Daniel asked, his voice softening as his law enforcement persona gave way to simple human compassion. "About 20 miles out of town," the old man whispered, his words fading into the night air. "I don't drive much anymore, but tonight I had to." Daniel studied the situation, weighing his options. The man had no business being behind the wheel. His vehicle was barely roadworthy, and his condition made nighttime driving dangerous. But there was something in the depth of his mission, the raw necessity of a father's need to honor his son, that Daniel couldn't bring himself to deny. "Sir," he said quietly, laying his hand on the car door, "why don't I take you there? You shouldn't drive tonight." The surprise danced across his tired features. You'd do that?" "I'll drive you myself. It's no trouble at all," Daniel assured him with a gentle nod. A trembling smile crossed the old man's face as he nodded, not once letting go of the folded flag. Daniel assisted him from his decrepit vehicle into the patrol car's passenger seat and got him comfortable before settling in behind the wheel himself. The drive through the night, Daniel glanced across to his passenger several times. He sat in introspective silence, eyes wide open and fixed on the passing darkness beyond the window. The silence was finally broken by the voice of the old man, laced with deep sadness and unmistakable pride. "My son, Eric. He was a good boy. He joined the Marines right out of high school. Always wanted to serve his country. He was my only child." His voice caught for a moment, tears catching the dim light. He died 2 years ago. Today would have been his 28th birthday. Daniel felt those words settle into his chest. He'd encountered other stories like this before, parents who lost children in war, but it was damned real sitting beside this father and seeing the real naked grief in his face. "I'm sorry for your loss," Daniel ventured quietly. The old man acknowledged the sympathy with a slight nod, his gaze fixed on some distant point. "It never gets easier losing a child. You expect to go first, not them. But life, it has a way of taking things from you when you least expect it." The journey to the cemetery seemed simultaneously endless and brief. As it was, the night had turned cold by the time they arrived, and Daniel helped the old man carefully from the car. The two walked through the dark cemetery in silence, the soft earth muffling the footfalls against the consecrated ground. At Eric's grave, the old man settled himself onto his knees, which took some doing, placing the folded flag alongside the headstone. Shaky fingers outlined the letters that spelled his son's name. "Happy birthday, Eric," he whispered, his voice breaking with emotion. Daniel stood still, keeping his distance and witnessing as the father gently told his son that everything would be all right. The trees nearby whispered among themselves through their leaves in the wind. Daniel felt that he had been privileged to see something much bigger than himself, a raw testimony to love's power that endures, grief and connection between parent and child eternal. Finally, the old man struggled to his feet, brushing away tears with weathered hands. His eyes, meeting Daniel's, held a depth of appreciation that transcended mere thanks. "Thank you," he whispered. "You didn't have to do this, but you did." Daniel shook his head gently. "It was my honor, sir." They walked back to the patrol car in comfortable silence, what they had shared between them a sacrosanct thing hung in the air. The drive to the man's house was quiet, with soft interjections every now and then, but it was that unspoken understanding that communicated volumes. At the man's residence, Daniel assisted him from the car and saw him safely to his door. Before stepping inside, the elderly father turned one last time. "You changed my night, officer. You didn't just get me to the cemetery. You gave me a bit of peace. I won't forget that." Daniel smiled, emotion tightening his throat. "Take care of yourself, sir." As he pulled away into the night, the streets once more empty and still, the impact of what had started out as a routine traffic stop began to really hit Daniel hard. Throughout his career, he'd encountered humanity in all its forms, its highest peaks and lowest valleys. But tonight had been different. The raw devotion of a father's grief, the enduring power of his love for his son, was etched in Daniel's soul forever.